Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. A good topic? Let's do it. What's the scariest thing that you've ever seen? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. I used to work on offshore oil rigs. The generators that power them are the size of a small house. One day, a technician forgot to lock out and tag out while he was checking why we were having voltage drops on the pump floor. A supervisor came by and saw the third generator was off and decided to fire it up. I was in the room trying to find a replacement pump sensor when it clicked. Boom, pop, zap. I saw a human explode, turn to plasma, then carbonize. The sound and smell never leave. I was driving through a rural area when my daughter said, "Mom, I think she needs help." I pulled over and turned around, and there was maybe a 12-year-old girl covered in blood on the side of the road. I don't know how I didn't see her, but another girl, around the same age, came out of the woods and said their car had flipped. I called 911 and went into the woods, and there's a car upside down in the 50-foot ravine. It was too steep to get down, but I could hear a woman screaming over and over again, "My baby, my baby." The girls said their mom and sister were still in the car, and rescuers arrived unbelievably fast. We gave the girl spare towels to stay warm, and then she just got out of the way. I read the paper, and that 9-year-old sister had died. Now I always scan those woods when I drive by. I was swimming with my niece and nephew in the wave pool. I half noticed 2 boys, 10, and 1 girl, 5, swim to the deep end. A few moments later, the waves started, and the boys quickly swam to the shallow end. Not really paying attention, I hear a tiny voice ask for help. Between huge waves, I see the little girl start climbing the ladder, and the next wave knocks her into the water again. I looked at the lifeguards, and they were talking to each other, not watching the water. Another wave comes, and she's under the water. Keep in mind that I'm a good swimmer, and she's in the deep end, which is too overwhelming for me to swim in. So I swim over to check on her, grab her elbow and lift her up, then ask her if she's okay. She says while gasping for air that she has asthma. I ask if she wants to go back to the shallow end. Exhausted and out of breath, she just nods her head. I pull her back to knee-deep water and ask her to point out her parents. She does, and when I ask if she is okay, she says she is. Not so scary for me, but probably terrifying for her. When I was a kid, we witnessed a very bad motorcycle accident. The poor guy ran into the side of a car. He went flying over the top of the car. Before the guy hit the road, my father, who was a nurse, was out of the car. When the guy came down, we saw a huge gash in his thigh, and my dad quickly took off his tie and used it as a tourniquet on the guy's upper thigh. Someone by then had thought quickly and called an ambulance. There were no cell phones back then, so it took a while. Then the motorcycle rider went into cardiac arrest. My dad didn't waste any time and gave him CPR until the paramedics arrived and took over. Thanks to my dad, the guy survived and made a full recovery. Dad was being very modest about the whole thing and didn't want any fuss because it was his job. He's no longer with us, but I will always remember that event. He was a real-life hero. I was sitting at a red light when I saw a head-on collision between 2 other cars. One of the drivers went head first through the windshield and landed with her head partially ripped off. Wear your seatbelts, kids. When I was 13, my dad popped out like 30 sleeping pills in front of me and swallowed all of them in an attempt to kill himself. My mom refused to call an ambulance, and I had to do it. The fire department arrived and kept my dad awake as he swayed around, fell over, and vomited in the yard. Then they took him to the hospital, and my drunk mom decided we should all get in the car and follow him. And then we crashed the car and almost died. I almost lost my whole family in one night. I haven't thought about that night since I was a teenager. As a kid, I saw my 5-year-old friend going through leukemia but did not make it. As a kid, nature protects you from sorrow, but it wasn't nice. Later in life, you realize what you saw and also understand quickly that people do not understand what it is until you see it yourself. Later in life, seeing health issues somehow makes you better prepared. My sister is having grand mal seizure. I was 5 years old and had overheard my mom mentioning her epilepsy without knowing what it was, but I was effing terrified when she had that seizure while in our yard. I watched a group of people cliff jumping nearby where my family members and I were having a beach day. One of the guys landed wrong and didn't come back up. Hearing or watching his friends or family look for him was awful. I once found myself crossing a very isolated walkway in my town at 1 a.m. with no cars or people in sight. While completely isolated, I met a group of 10 to 15 stray dogs of varying sizes coming from the opposite direction. I couldn't change my path or do anything about it. I needed to cross them. Some of them were quite big, but they were all kind of skinny, probably hungry, and one of the small asshole ones started barking and threatening me. That encouraged all of them to start barking and doing the same. I knew if one of them attacked me, if I ran or tried to fight back, it was game over. They were going to swarm and obliterate me. Death by being eviscerated by a dozen dogs. The thought alone made me shit myself completely. I ate the fear and just ignored them. They ended up not attacking, but that was a traumatic experience just because of the implication of what could possibly happen. Not fun. An entire second team of like 20 doctors, nurses, interns, and specialists entered the room right before my wife gave birth, which kind of freaked me out. The baby not crying and being immediately whisked to the special baby table was pretty scary. Baby ended up okay and just needed a tiny bit of fluid sucked out of her lungs, but I was definitely not prepared for it to not be a fairly routine birth. I was 7 years old when I saw a motorcycle hit a station wagon. His face smashed through a window, and when the guy got up, his face was covered in blood, yelling that he couldn't see. My mom rushed me out of there as quickly as she could, but I still remember the look on his face to this day. 47 now. I was on a run when I was 15ish. Mom was at work and my sister was at school, so I was totally alone. Being that I did high school online at the time, other than sports at the local high school. When I was a couple of blocks away, I got this really bad feeling like I was being followed, but it was like 10 a.m., so I tried not to think too much about it. A really bad habit I had post-workout was that given that we were in a rural area, I'd walk around the house without a shirt while making my protein shake and getting ready to soak in our hot tub. While doing these things, my dogs started barking wildly, but I dismissed it as being some sort of animal in the woods. After about an hour, I went upstairs to change, and once again heard my dogs barking at the fence line bordering the woods. When I looked out the window, I saw what looked like a man's shoulders, and the top of his head facing our house directly in some bushes, maybe 10 feet from the fence. After I stood there in horror for a little while, he turned around and disappeared into the woods. I immediately called my mom, who called the police, and they checked the woods behind her house and didn't find anything. However, when Mom brought it up to some parents in the area, some said their sons also reported a creepy older dude following them in those woods and on the outskirts of high school grounds. Needless to say, I switched to running on our treadmill for a long time and made a habit of keeping all of our blinds closed. I was pretty terrified of this guy breaking into the house and coming after me too, so for a long time I kept my pocket knife on me at all times and walked around the house with my gas-powered BB gun. I opened the door of my childhood home to see a house covered floor to ceiling in black soot from the fire my mentally ill brother had set, and my father with his face down in a pool of blood, having met the business end of a shotgun. I didn't know my brother was dead already, but I was somehow convinced in that moment of horror, despite the unbreathably stale air that hit me upon opening the door, that he was inside waiting to finish the job. I can never make fun of horror films again because I could barely start my car as I dialed 911 and try to get to safety. It's a shame that there are areas where it's really just unsafe to operate a motorcycle. That doesn't stop people from doing it, but it's not always the rider. Sometimes it's the other drivers, but either way, it sucks that you can't just ride a bike when you want. I'll tell you the scariest moment I've ever had. I was a young guy who hadn't yet learned how important it is to drive defensively, and I was hurtling down a road on my motorcycle. Well, hurtling may be overstating it. I was only going about 50 miles per hour, but I hadn't yet learned that some people just have a blind spot when it comes to motorcycles. They can look straight at you and not see you. This is what the elderly driver departing a strip mall did as he tried to cross my lane, turning left to go in the opposite direction as mine. He had looked directly at me and not seen anything. I probably owe my life to his wife, seated next to him, who did see me and yelled at him to stop. He did, but was now completely blocking the road in front of me. I had basically no time to think, but I remember briefly thinking I had to put the bike down. But with the reflexes of a young guy, I swerved my bike hard to the left to try and cross the car's front bumper. I instinctively looked down at my right foot pedal to see that the bumper was less than the width of my foot at 50 miles per hour. Now, I was in wrong-way traffic, so at the next median, I went back on the right side. About a mile or so later, I had to stop at another strip mall, lay down on the pavement, and start shaking uncontrollably for a pretty good while. After I recovered, I drove back to my place, thought for a day or two about it, and put that bike up for sale. Christmas Eve 2018. I'm pregnant with an ileostomy bag and have a problem with my baby pushing on my intestine, causing it to protrude a couple of inches more than its usual half inch that sticks out from my body. It's just a bit though, never anything alarming until now. I feel an incredibly sharp pain in my lower abdomen and start seeing white. I collapsed on the floor, unable to move. I feel an enormous amount of pressure coming from my stomach site, and it feels as if my bag is completely full. My husband carries me to the bathroom, and that's where we see it. My intestine had protruded an entire 12 inches from my body, 1 foot. It literally looks like Alien or Predator, or better yet, it's both Alien and Predator, and they're fighting one another. Blood is everywhere. Shit is spilling out. I have an entire intestine lying on the floor beside me. We have no way to contain it or know what to do. We know that no hospital around us will be able to tackle this problem. We are in a very middle of nowhere town in South Georgia, so we make the difficult decision to drive to see my surgeon, who is 5 hours north of us. We make the trip, bloody, shit-covered intestines laying out in the car, screaming, crying, and throwing up on the way at 3 a.m. on Christmas morning. The ER doctor on call turned white as a Christmas ghost and paged my doctor immediately. Long story short, I had the dead intestine chopped off, sewed the healthy intestine to my stomach so it wouldn't happen again. Ended up having to take my gallbladder out as well, had 2 kidney stones weeks later, and was on bed rest for the rest of the pregnancy until I had to deliver early via C-section to a beautiful, healthy baby boy that's 5 now. When I was a Cub Scout, they had this local jamboree with all the packs and troops from the area. They put us all in the bleachers around a football field and then had this helicopter fly to do a demonstration. The helicopter hovered over the field for a moment and then dropped like a brick. I would guess the collective failed and the blades went flat. Anyways, the thing hit the dirt hard and tipped, and the top and tail rotors hit the ground and disintegrated, and pieces went flying everywhere around the field and stands. No scouts were hurt, miraculously, but they made us all stay put in the bleachers while they carefully extracted the pilot and co-pilot from the wreckage and put them in ambulances. I came around a bend on a highway to see an overturned school bus on the shoulder, laying on its side, smoke coming from underneath, and the wheel still spinning. Somehow, I was the only car in sight on a 3-lane freeway at 7:30 to 8 a.m. As I slammed on my brakes and pulled off the road, I saw the driver climb out of his window, now on top of the vehicle, and jump down and run up the embankment. As I'm jumping out of my car and running toward the bus, I'm calling 911 on my cell as I go. I have no idea what I'm going to see. I'm panicking. School buses don't even have seat belts here. There could be dozens of children in any state of injury in there. I've already got PTSD from my own horrible car accident, sort of freaking out. The bus was empty. I don't live in the awesomest neighborhood. It's not super low income or slummy normally, but it's right next to the rail yard, so property values are lowish. It's not high crime, but we've had a couple of SWAT busts within a few blocks of here in the last decade. The scary one for me was last summer. My dog starts barking like a maniac, so I poke my head out front. She usually settles if I take her onto the porch for a sec to check the perimeter, and saw several cop cars with lights blocking the street just 2 houses down, and worse, an officer aiming a black bullpup across the hood of his cruiser at the house. I was like, nope. I went back inside and had my family down in the basement hanging out for an extra hour past bedtime until the situation wrapped up. It turns out there was a guy with some mental challenges living in that house with his mom and some other family, and he's a really big guy. He had some kind of episode, all resolved within a shot fired or any major going on. But that's the closest I've been to real violence since my kids were born. Walking through South Philadelphia 2 years ago, I walked under a highway overpass near the waterfront on my way to a cafe. Shortly after crossing the street, I felt a massive shockwave on my back with heat and a sound like a cannon. As I turned, I saw a massive cloud of fire under the overpass, where I'd just been seconds earlier. I was entranced by the way the fire in the air began to dissipate slowly into smoke, with no visible damage having been done to anything. There were no people in the affected area, and nothing was flammable to catch. I called emergency services to report it. As I walked down the street, I spoke with some other local folks who came out to figure out what the hell happened. When I got my destination several blocks away, a cafe that I went to every day for my lunch break, I was asked if I knew what the sound was. And finally, when I walked back to work, a school, my coworkers asked me what was going on, since I was the only staff not at school when they heard an explosion and locked everyone down inside the building. Emergency services responded to multiple calls, but as there was no lasting damage, there wasn't anything for them to do. The best explanation I've heard was that there was an accident on I-95 spilling fuel through the rain vents to underneath the overpass. Some spark could have ignited it, creating a massive fireball I witnessed. Luckily, no harm was done to me or anyone else, but if I'd been a few seconds late in leaving for my lunch, I have no idea how differently things could have gone. This freak explosion that had everyone puzzled was heard through the city and couldn't be credibly traced back to a cause, could have been the thing that killed me, and it wouldn't have been any less mysterious for it. All those folks who came out as the flames turned to smoke would be the ones to have found me, with even less of an idea of what happened than I would have. I still think of what I saw, a cloud of fire transforming into swirling tongues of flame, which dissipated into smoke before disappearing in the air.